Kang Daeho stared at the screen in his small lab aboard the research ship Harmony. The signal they had picked up 3 days ago made no sense. It was old, very old, but still active somehow. Captain Lee Hyo-jin had decided to investigate, even though it meant going to the edge of known space. Daeho was a xenoarchaeologist. He studied dead alien civilizations. For 34 years, he had lived a quiet life, just like every other human. War was impossible for them now. The Great Peace had made sure of that. Special treatments and conditioning had removed all violent thoughts from human minds over 200 years ago. They were peaceful now, safe. But something felt different as they got closer to the signal source. Park Ji-woo called from the communication station. "Daeho, you need to see this." Her voice was strange, excited in a way that seemed wrong. Humans did not get excited about unknown signals. They were careful, cautious people now. Daeho walked to her station. On the screen was a star map showing their destination. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "The signal is coming from a debris field, but it's not just any debris. Look at these energy readings." Ji-woo pointed to the data. "There are 2 different types of technology here, and they're both still powered after thousands of years." Captain Lee's voice came over the ship's speakers. "All hands were approaching the source. Prepare for visual contact." The main screen in the lab flickered and showed space ahead of them. What they saw made Daeho's breath catch in his throat. Floating in the darkness were the remains of hundreds of ships. Some were long and thin with sharp edges. Others were round and covered in strange bumps. The ships were torn apart, broken, but they still glowed with faint energy. "It's a battlefield," Daeho whispered. But as soon as he said the word battlefield, something strange happened in his mind. For just a moment he could see the battle as it had happened. Ships firing at each other, explosions, tactics, and strategies that made perfect sense to him. Then the vision was gone, leaving him confused and shaking. Choi Tae-min, the ship's engineer, came running into the lab. "Something's wrong with the engines," he said, breathing hard. "They're running perfectly, but all the readings are different. It's like the ship knows where it wants to go." Captain Lee's voice came again. "We're detecting movement in the debris field. Some of the wrecks are still active." On the screen, they watched as pieces of the broken ships began to move. Weapon systems that should have been dead for millennia turned toward the Harmony. Energy readings spiked on both types of alien technology. Daeho felt his heart race, but not with fear, with something else. Something that felt like recognition. Then, as suddenly as they had activated, all the alien weapons powered down. Every single one. The debris field became quiet again. "What just happened?" Ji-woo asked, her hands shaking as she worked her controls. Daeho found himself speaking without thinking. "They recognized us." The words came out of his mouth before he could stop them. But he had no idea what they meant or why he had said them. Captain Lee came to the lab herself. At 45, she was older than most of the crew, but she looked troubled in a way Daeho had never seen before. "We're going to investigate one of the wrecks," she said. "Daeho, I want you to come with me." "Ji-woo, keep monitoring all signals." "Tae-min, make sure our ship stays ready to leave quickly." They took a small shuttle to the nearest wreck. It was one of the long, sharp ships. Up close, Daeho could see it was covered in symbols and markings. As they got closer, more strange thoughts filled his mind. He knew what those symbols meant, even though he had never seen them before. They were tactical markings, unit designations, battle honors. Inside the alien ship, they found something that changed everything. In what looked like the command center, there was a device still working after all these years. It was some kind of data storage system. When Daeho touched it, information flooded into his mind. The ship belonged to something called the Vorth Empire. They were reptilian beings who had conquered dozens of star systems. The round, bumpy ships belonged to the Keth Swarm, insect-like creatures who consumed entire planets. These 2 civilizations had fought each other across the galaxy for thousands of years. But the most shocking information was about a third group. The data called them the Sleeping Generals and the Gods of Ending. The descriptions made Daeho's blood run cold, because they sounded exactly like humans. According to the Vorth records, the Sleeping Generals had appeared during the final phase of the Vorth-Keth War. They had ended the conflict in a way that terrified both sides so much that the surviving ships had fled to this remote system to hide. But even here, the Sleeping Generals had found them and finished what they started. Captain Lee read over his shoulder. "This can't be right," she said, but her voice was uncertain. "Humans were barely out of caves when this happened." We couldn't have been in space. But Daeho was remembering things that should not be in his memory. Battle plans, ship movements, the perfect way to position forces for maximum effect. He could see exactly how the sleeping generals had ended this ancient war, and it was brilliant and terrible at the same time. That night, back on the Harmony, Daeho had dreams. He dreamed of battles among the stars. He dreamed of fleets moving in perfect formation. He dreamed of enemies surrendering before the fighting even began, because they knew they could not win. In his dreams, he was not a peaceful archaeologist. He was something else entirely. Jiwoo found him in the morning, staring out at the debris field. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I dreamed of war," Daeho told her. "And the strange thing is, I was good at it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I had the same dreams." We all did, even Captain Lee. As they prepared to leave the debris field and return to Earth, Daeho realized that everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. They were not naturally peaceful. They were something much more dangerous that had chosen to be peaceful. But now something was waking up inside them, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The question was, what would happen when it fully awakened? 3 weeks after the Harmony returned to Earth, Kang Daeho sat in a white room with no windows. Across from him sat Kim So-ra, a military psychologist who had been called in to study what the government was calling the incident. But Daeho knew it was more than an incident. It was an awakening. "Tell me about the dreams again," So-ra said, her voice calm and professional. She was 29 with kind eyes, but Daeho could see something else in them now. "Fear. They're not dreams," Daeho said. "They're memories. But not my memories. They belong to someone else, or maybe all of us." He paused, trying to find the right words. "In them I know things about war that I was never taught. I can see entire battles in my mind and know exactly how to win them." So-ra made notes on her tablet. "And this started after you touched the alien device?" "It started before that," Daeho corrected. "The moment we saw that battlefield, something changed in all of us. The device just made it stronger." Down the hall, Park Jiwoo was answering similar questions, but her interviewer was different. Yoon Jae-sung was a government official who had been sent to make sure certain information never became public. At 52, he had lived through the last years of the Great Peace Project and knew what humans had been before the conditioning. "The reports say you could understand alien tactical systems without any training," Yoon said, his voice sharp. "That's impossible for a conditioned human." Jiwoo stared at him. "Maybe we're not as conditioned as you think." Yoon's face went pale. This was exactly what the government feared. If the conditioning was breaking down, if humans were remembering what they used to be, the careful peace of 2 centuries could collapse in days. In another part of the building, Han Min-ji worked at her computer terminal. As a data analyst, she had been given access to classified historical records to help understand what had happened to the Harmony's crew. What she found made her hands shake. The Third World War had not ended because people got tired of fighting. It had ended because the fighting was so efficient, so perfectly planned and executed, that entire armies were destroyed in hours. The war had lasted only 6 months, but in that time, humanity had shown a capacity for warfare that terrified even themselves. The surviving governments had made a desperate choice. They had used genetic therapy, psychological conditioning, and social engineering to remove humanity's ability to make war. They had turned a species of perfect soldiers into peaceful researchers and farmers and artists. But the genetic changes were not permanent. They could be reversed. And something about the alien battlefield was reversing them. Minji found records of other incidents, small ones hidden in classified files. A human diplomat who had somehow ended a trade war between 2 alien species with a single conversation. A human explorer whose presence had made an aggressive alien fleet retreat without explanation. A human scientist whose theoretical work on military tactics had been banned and all copies destroyed. The evidence was clear. Some humans had been breaking free of their conditioning for years, but the government had covered it up each time. Captain Lee Hyo-jin sat in her own white room, but she was not being questioned. She was being warned. A man in an expensive suit told her that everything her crew had experienced was classified and must never be discussed again. "We understand that you've all been under stress," the man said. The psychological effects of deep space travel can cause hallucinations and false memories. We're prepared to provide treatment to help you forget these troubling experiences. But Lee was not listening to his words. She was listening to something else. Something in the back of her mind that was telling her exactly how to disable the room's security systems, exactly where the guards were standing, and exactly how many steps it would take to reach the door. The knowledge was there, clear and perfect, like it had always been, waiting for her to need it. "No," she said quietly. The man blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. "We won't be taking any treatment, and we won't be forgetting anything." Security guards moved toward her, but Lee was already standing. Without thinking, she positioned herself in the center of the room where she could see all threats at once. Her body moved into a stance she had never learned but somehow knew perfectly. The guard stopped, suddenly uncertain. "You should know," Lee said, her voice calm but carrying a strange authority, "that trying to force us will not end well for anyone." The man in the suit made a quick call and the guards left. Within an hour, Lee and her entire crew were released and told to return to normal duties. But Minji's research had already been copied and sent to other data analysts around the world. The information spread quickly through hidden networks of humans who had always felt different, who had always wondered why certain thoughts seemed forbidden, why certain subjects were never discussed in school or in the media. Dr. Kwon Seok-jin had worked on the original conditioning project 50 years ago. Now 78 and officially retired, he received Minji's data packet on his secure terminal. As he read it, memories came flooding back. Memories of what humans had been like before the Great Peace. He had been young then, fresh out of university, working on what they told him was a project to help people overcome trauma from the war. Only later did he learn the truth. They had not been curing trauma. They had been suppressing the fundamental nature of human consciousness. Seok-jin made a decision that would change everything. He activated an emergency broadcast system that had been built into the old conditioning network. Originally designed to reinforce peaceful thoughts, he reprogrammed it to do the opposite. He sent out a signal that would begin reversing the psychological barriers in every conditioned human on Earth. The effect was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Across the planet, humans began to experience strange dreams. They began to remember things that had never happened to them personally but felt absolutely real. They began to understand concepts and strategies they had never been taught. Most importantly, they began to question why they had never been allowed to learn about their own history. In space, alien civilizations that monitored human communications detected the changes. Emergency councils were called. Ancient warnings were remembered. The Zephyrians, a peaceful trading people, immediately began restricting human access to their space stations. Their oldest records spoke of a species that could end conflicts simply by understanding them too well. The Molten Hegemony, always aggressive and confident in their military might, laughed at the warnings. But their border commanders noticed something strange. Human ships that had always been predictable were now moving differently. Their pilots seemed to understand space combat in ways that made veteran alien commanders uncomfortable. The Crystal Confederacy, beings of pure logic who had studied every species in the galaxy, ran calculations based on the new data about humans. Their computers crashed trying to process the implications. A species that could voluntarily suppress its own nature and then choose to remember it was beyond their understanding. Back on Earth, Dai-Ho stood in his apartment looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, millions of humans were beginning to remember what they really were. The question was not whether this awakening could be stopped. It was whether humanity was ready to face what it would become. In his mind, he could feel the dreams getting stronger. Soon they would not be dreams at all. They would be memories. And when that happened, the galaxy would have to decide whether the sleeping gods of war should remain asleep, or whether it was time for them to wake up completely. 6 months had passed since Dr. Kwon Seok-jin sent his signal across Earth. The changes in humanity were becoming impossible to hide. Bae Hyun-woo sat in his small apartment staring at his hands. They were the hands of a cargo handler, someone who moved boxes from one place to another. But in his dreams, these same hands had held weapons and given orders that changed the course of battles across the stars. At 38, Hyun-woo had lived a simple, peaceful life. But now he remembered another life, one where he had worn different clothes and carried a different name. In those memories, he was not a cargo handler. He was something the memories called a shadow operative, someone who ended wars before they could begin. The memories felt more real each day. Soon, he knew they would completely replace his conditioned personality. Across the city, Shin Ai-ri worked in her laboratory studying something that should not exist. She was a xenobiologist, but her current project had nothing to do with alien life forms. She was studying fear responses in alien communications, and what she had found terrified her. Every alien species that had detected the changes in humanity was responding the same way. They were afraid. Not cautious or concerned, but deeply instinctively afraid. Their communications showed panic levels that Ai-ri had only seen in prey animals facing certain death. "It doesn't make sense," she told her research partner. "Humans are still peaceful. We haven't done anything threatening. So why are they so scared?" But even as she said it, Ai-ri knew it was not entirely true. Humans were changing, and the aliens could sense it somehow. They could feel something waking up that had been asleep for a very long time. In orbit around Earth, Oh Dong-jun piloted his cargo ship toward the outer colonies. It was a routine run, something he had done hundreds of times. But today was different. Today, his ship moved through space like it was alive, responding to threats that his instruments could not even detect. When 3 molten hegemony patrol ships appeared on his sensors, Dong-jun felt something cold settle in his mind. The alien ships were known for being aggressive, for demanding tribute from human cargo vessels. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. Without conscious thought, Dong-jun adjusted his ship's course and speed in a way that put him in perfect position to disable all 3 alien vessels if needed. He had never been trained in combat flying. He had never even seen a weapons manual. But somehow he knew exactly where each alien ship's weaknesses were and how to exploit them. The molten hegemony pilots felt it too. They sensed they were being analyzed by something that understood their ships better than they did. Without explanation, they turned around and left. Later, their report would describe feeling observed by something that understood killing better than they understood living. The incident was reported to the hegemony's high command, where it caused immediate concern. If humans were developing military capabilities again, the implications were terrifying. Ancient records spoke of humans who could win battles simply by understanding them completely. On the peaceful world of Zephyr Prime, Ambassador Colthin read the reports with growing alarm. The Zephyrians had traded with humans for decades, finding them to be honest and reliable partners. But their oldest archives contained warnings about humanity that had seemed like myths until now. The warnings spoke of the silence makers, beings who could end conflicts permanently by eliminating all participants. According to the records, the silence makers had appeared throughout galactic history whenever wars grew too large or too destructive. They would study the conflict, understand it completely, and then end it with surgical precision that left survivors too traumatized to fight again. Colthin sent an urgent message to his government. All trade with humans should be suspended immediately. The Crystal Confederacy, meanwhile, approached the problem with pure logic. Their finest analytical minds studied every piece of available data about human history and current behavior. What they concluded sent shockwaves through their crystalline society. Humanity was not just another species that had developed military technology. They were something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had evolved not to fight wars, but to end them. Their entire evolutionary path seemed designed to create the perfect conflict resolution system, one that worked by being better at warfare than anyone they faced. The Confederacy's computers calculated that if humanity returned to its preconditioning state, no force in the galaxy could resist them. Not because humans were stronger or had better technology, but because they understood conflict itself at a fundamental level that other species could not match. Back on Earth, the government tried desperately to control the situation. Special teams were sent to collect humans showing signs of awakening, but the teams kept failing in strange ways. Guards would find themselves outmaneuvered by farmers and shop clerks who moved with impossible precision. Containment facilities would be escaped from using methods that security experts could not explain. Hyunwoo was one of those who escaped. But he did not run or hide. Instead, he did something that proved how much humanity was changing. He walked into a government building and asked to speak with whoever was in charge of the Awakening Project. When security tried to stop him, Hyunwoo simply stood still and spoke. "You can try to arrest me, but that would be a mistake. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to help you understand what's happening. Something in his voice, some quality of absolute confidence made the guards step back. Within an hour, Hyunwoo was sitting across from the highest-ranking officials in the human government. The conditioning is breaking down, he told them. Not just in a few people, but in all of us. You can't stop it, and trying to fight it will only make things worse. What do you suggest? Asked the Secretary of Peace, a woman who had spent her entire career maintaining humanity's peaceful nature. Accept it, Hyunwoo said. We're remembering what we used to be, but we're not the same as we were before. We've learned things during our time as a peaceful species. We can be what we were meant to be without losing what we've become. But even as he said it, Hyunwoo knew the real test was coming. Across the galaxy, 3 major wars were building that could destroy billions of lives. The conditioning had suppressed humanity's interventionist instincts for 2 centuries. But those instincts were returning soon. Humans would face a choice: let the galaxy tear itself apart, or remember why they had once been called gods of war, the alien civilizations forming their collective Defense Alliance did not realize they were creating the very situation that would force humanity to fully awaken. By treating humans as a threat, they were ensuring that humans would have to become one. In his apartment, Dongjun felt the change happening in his mind. The memories were becoming clearer, stronger. Soon he would remember not just how to fly a ship, but how to lead fleets across star systems. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity was about to become. The answer, he suspected, was no. Jungwoo Jin stood before a crowd of 2,000 humans in Seoul's largest auditorium. At 30, he had become the leader of a movement that many considered humanity's last hope for staying peaceful. His message was simple. They should fight the awakening, not embrace it. We chose to become peaceful, Woo Jin said to the crowd. Our ancestors looked at what we were capable of and decided it was too dangerous. Are we so arrogant that we think we know better than they did? In the crowd, people nodded and applauded. They were scared of what they were becoming, scared of the memories and instincts that grew stronger each day. Many had felt the urge to intervene in conflicts they saw on the news, to solve problems with methods that terrified them. But not everyone in the crowd agreed. Lim Subin sat in the back row, her 27-year-old mind processing Woo Jin's arguments and finding them flawed. As a tactical analyst for a shipping company, Subin had always been good with patterns and systems, but now her abilities had grown beyond anything that should be possible. She could look at any conflict, from a trade dispute to a territorial war, and see exactly how it would develop over months or years. More importantly, she could see the precise interventions that would end the conflict with minimal damage to all sides. The knowledge came to her as naturally as breathing. While Woo Jin spoke about the dangers of their awakening nature, Subin's mind was analyzing 3 major galactic conflicts that were building toward catastrophe. The Hegemony Confederacy border war would begin in 6 months and kill millions. The Zephyrian trade civil war would start in 8 months and destroy their entire economy. The Outer Rim resource conflict would begin in a year and spread to dozens of species. All 3 wars could be prevented with simple interventions that any awakened human could design. But Woo Jin wanted them to do nothing, to let billions die rather than use abilities they did not choose to have. After the speech, Subin approached Woo Jin backstage. You're wrong, she said quietly. The conditioning didn't make us peaceful. It made us selfish. Woo Jin turned to face her. What do you mean? Before the conditioning, we intervened in conflicts because we couldn't stand to watch suffering. We ended wars because ending them was the right thing to do. The conditioning didn't teach us to love peace. It taught us to ignore other people's pain. And you think going back to being warriors is the answer? Subin shook her head. We were never warriors. We were healers. We healed the galaxy by cutting out the infections that caused wars. That's what we're meant to do. Their conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert that appeared on every screen in the building. The Collective Defense Alliance, the union of alien civilizations formed to counter the human threat, had launched what they called a preemptive peace action against human colonies in the Outer Rim. 12 human settlements had been attacked simultaneously. The aliens claimed they were conducting surgical strikes to prevent human expansion, but the reality was much worse. Entire communities had been destroyed, families killed, children orphaned. Nam Gite had been a peacekeeper on one of those colonies. At 44, He had dedicated his life to helping people resolve conflicts through discussion and compromise. He had never raised his hand in violence against another being. But when the alien attack began, something changed in Gite's mind. As he watched his neighbors' homes burning and heard the screams of injured civilians, the conditioning that had suppressed his true nature for decades simply vanished. What emerged was not a mindless berserker or a cruel killer. What emerged was something far more dangerous, a human who understood exactly how to use violence to end violence permanently. Gite organized the colonial defense in ways that should have been impossible for a peacekeeper. He positioned the few civilian ships they had available in patterns that made the attacking alien fleet hesitate. He used psychological warfare tactics that made the enemy commanders doubt their mission. He turned a massacre into a stalemate, then into a retreat. But most importantly, he made sure that every alien who survived would carry a message back to their fleets. Humans were not the prey they had expected. The effect rippled across the galaxy faster than light-speed communication. The aliens who had participated in the attack reported experiences that their commanders could not explain. They described human defenders who seemed to predict their every move, who turned their own tactics against them, who fought not with rage but with a cold understanding that was more terrifying than any emotion. Within days, 3 of the 6 species in the Collective Defense Alliance withdrew from the organization. Their military leaders had read the battle reports and realized they were not equipped to fight an enemy that understood warfare better than they understood themselves. On Earth, the government's careful control over information finally collapsed. Images and videos from the Outer Rim attacks spread across all networks, along with recordings of how the human colonists had defended themselves. The peaceful conditioning that had suppressed human nature for 2 centuries cracked like ice in spring. Subin found herself appointed as a special advisor to the Earth Defense Council, the organization that had not existed a week earlier, but was now humanity's primary decision-making body for the crisis. In the council chambers, she stood before the same officials who had once insisted that humans should never again be allowed to make war. The Alien Alliance was correct about one thing, Subin told them. We are a threat, but not in the way they think. She activated a holographic display showing the 3 major conflicts she had been analyzing. These wars are going to happen whether we intervene or not. The difference is whether billions die or whether we find solutions that save everyone. And how do you propose we do that? Asked the Secretary of Peace, the same woman who had spoken with Bae Hyunwoo months earlier. We do what we've always done, Subin replied. We end the conflicts before they can spread. The aliens are afraid of us because they remember what happens when we get involved in wars. We don't pick sides. We don't conquer territory. We simply make it impossible for the fighting to continue. Around the table, the officials looked at each other with expressions mixing fear and resignation. They had spent their entire careers maintaining human pacification, but the universe had made that choice for them impossible to sustain. The alien attack had awakened something in humanity that could no longer be suppressed. Across Earth and its colonies, millions of humans were discovering abilities they had never known they possessed. Military strategies appeared in their minds like half-remembered songs. Tactical solutions to conflicts presented themselves with crystal clarity. Most disturbing of all, they were beginning to feel the urge to use these abilities. Not for conquest or revenge, but for the same reason a surgeon feels compelled to operate on a patient who will die without intervention. The galaxy was sick with conflicts that would spread and destroy everything if left untreated. And humanity was remembering that they were the cure. As Subin left the council chambers, she knew the decision had already been made. Humanity would return to its role as the galaxy's immune system, cutting out the infections that caused wars before they could spread. The only question was whether the rest of the galaxy would survive the treatment. Seo Junho had never wanted to be a leader. At 35, he had been content working as a logistics coordinator for interplanetary shipping. But when the awakening reached its full strength, Junho discovered that his mind could process conflicts on a scale that defied understanding. He could see entire galactic-scale wars as clearly as others saw chess games. Within weeks of the Outer Rim attacks, Junho found himself appointed as the Supreme Coordinator of Human Intervention Operations. It was a title that would have been meaningless 6 months earlier, but now it carried the weight of the galaxy's future. In the command center that had been hastily constructed beneath Geneva, Junho stood before a three-dimensional map showing the entire known galaxy. Red zones marked areas where conflicts were building. There were dozens of them, but 3 were growing so quickly that they threatened to consume everything around them. Status report, Junho said to his staff. Each person in the room had undergone the same awakening he had. They were farmers, teachers, shop clerks, and cargo pilots who now possessed an intuitive understanding of strategy that surpassed the greatest military minds in galactic history. Lim Subin stepped forward. Her analysis capabilities had grown even stronger in recent weeks. The Hegemony Confederacy border war began 3 hours ago, she reported. Initial casualty projections show 2.4 million deaths in the first week, if it follows the standard escalation pattern. The Zephyrian situation? Junho asked. Civil war declared 2 days ago. Their entire trade network is collapsing. Refugee estimates are climbing toward 50 million displaced beings within the month. And the Outer Rim resource conflict? 6 species are now involved. It's spreading exactly as predicted. Full galactic involvement within 18 months if left unchecked. Junho nodded, his expression calm despite the magnitude of the disasters unfolding across space. Initiate corrective operations. All 3 conflicts, simultaneous intervention. What happened next would be remembered as the day the galaxy learned why humans had once been called gods of war. Human ships that had been peaceful cargo vessels and research platforms suddenly moved with purpose that alien observers found terrifying. They did not carry weapons in the traditional sense. They did not need to. Their crews had awakened to abilities that made conventional weapons seem primitive. In the Hegemony Confederacy war zone, Commander Odongjun led a small fleet of 12 human ships against opposing forces that numbered in the thousands. But Junho had not sent Dongjun to fight a traditional battle. He had sent him to end the war entirely. Dongjun's ships moved through the combat zone like ghosts, avoiding direct confrontation while performing maneuvers that seemed to violate the laws of physics. They were not trying to destroy the alien fleets. They were demonstrating something far more unsettling. Perfect understanding of how both sides thought and fought. Every tactical move the aliens made was anticipated. Every strategy was countered before it could be implemented. Within hours, both the Hegemony and Confederacy fleets found themselves in positions where continuing to fight would result in mutual annihilation, while withdrawing would allow their enemies to claim victory. It was an impossible situation that should have led to escalation. Instead, both sides simply stopped fighting and requested negotiation. The Zephyrian Civil War ended even more dramatically. An Ye-jin, serving as a diplomatic coordinator, arrived at the capital world with just 3 human advisors. They spent exactly 18 hours in closed meetings with both sides of the conflict. What they said in those meetings was never recorded, but the results spoke for themselves. The Zephyrian factions did not just agree to stop fighting. They created a new form of government that resolved the underlying issues that had caused the Civil War in the first place. Years of careful planning by human analysts had produced a solution that satisfied everyone involved. The Outer Rim resource conflict proved to be the most challenging because it involved 6 different species with completely different ways of thinking about territory and resources. But Junho had assigned his most capable coordinator to handle it, Nam Gitae, the former peacekeeper whose transformation during the alien attacks had shown the true nature of human conflict resolution. Gitae did not arrive with ships or weapons. He arrived alone in a small diplomatic vessel and requested meetings with all 6 species simultaneously. What he proposed was so elegant that it took the alien leaders 3 days to fully understand it. Instead of fighting over the disputed resources, the 6 species would form a cooperative extraction and distribution network that would provide more wealth to each of them than they could have gained through conquest. The plan addressed not just the immediate territorial dispute, but the underlying economic and social pressures that had made the conflict inevitable. More importantly, it created a framework for preventing similar conflicts throughout the region. Within 1 week, 3 major galactic wars had been ended not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding. The aliens involved were not defeated or humiliated. They were healed. But the rest of the galaxy watched these interventions with growing terror. The speed and precision with which humans had ended conflicts that should have raged for years proved that every ancient warning about their species had been true. Emergency sessions were called by Every major galactic government. The question was no longer whether humans were a threat, but what could be done about a species that could end any conflict simply by understanding it completely. The answer came from an unexpected source. Kwon Seok-jin, the scientist who had triggered humanity's awakening, sent a message to every government in the galaxy. In it, he explained what humans really were and what they wanted. "We are not conquerors," the message said. "We are not interested in your territories or your resources. We are healers, and the galaxy is our patient. When you have a disease, you do not negotiate with it. You cure it. War is a disease that spreads and destroys. We are the cure." The message continued. "We understand that our abilities frighten you. They should. But understand this. We use these abilities not to harm, but to prevent harm. Every conflict we end saves lives that would otherwise be lost to meaningless violence." Junho established the Terran Intervention Council with representatives from every awakened human colony. Their mission was simple: monitor galactic conflicts and intervene only when necessary to prevent greater suffering. The Council's first official act was to publish a set of principles that would guide all human interventions. They would not take sides in conflicts. They would not claim territory or demand tribute. They would simply end wars in ways that addressed the underlying causes, then withdraw and let the affected species manage their own affairs. Most importantly, they made it clear that they would intervene in any conflict that threatened to spread beyond its original participants. The galaxy's age of total war was over. 6 months later, Kang Dae-ho stood in his laboratory looking at reports from across known space. Conflicts were still occurring, but they remained small and local. Species were learning to resolve their differences through negotiation rather than war, partly because they knew what would happen if their conflicts grew too large. The galaxy was not peaceful, but it was stable. Disagreements and competitions continued, but the devastating wars that had once consumed entire star systems were becoming extinct. Dae-ho smiled as he realized the truth that had taken him so long to understand. Humans were not gods of war. They were gods of ending wars. And sometimes, to end something, you had to be better at it than anyone else who tried to continue it. Outside his window, he could see ships preparing to leave for the outer regions of the galaxy, where new conflicts were always developing. The awakened humans aboard those ships were not going to conquer or destroy. They were going to heal a sick galaxy, one war at a time. The slumbering gods had awakened, and the universe was learning to be grateful for their vigilance.